by beginning. We'll begin where we should, with an acknowledgement of country. I'm coming to you from beautiful Bundjalung country here in the far north of New South Wales. I imagine you're from all over the nation, and encourage you to reflect on the country that you're on today. Just take a moment to think about what that actually means in terms of land, in terms of history, in terms of relationships to land, and how that has changed over time, and the depth and the expertise that First Nations people bring to our country and to our climate change responses. So my sincere respect to any First Nations people present, to elders, past and present, and a very much a heartfelt thank you for sharing this extraordinary cultural heritage with me. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the nation. It's good afternoon for me. My name is Kerry Foxwell Norton. I'm an Associate Professor of Environmental Communication, Media and Journalism at Griffith University, and I'm also a leader within the Climate Action Beacon, which is what brings us here today. Thanks so much for taking the time to attend. I know towards the end of the year, things start getting a little bit busy and start to seem a little bit impossible, but I've just returned from 5 weeks laptop-free leave, so I'm full of beans and pretty excited about the webinar today. This webinar is an initiative of the Climate Action Beacon. The Climate Action Beacon, for those of you that don't know, is a strategic research initiative inspired and undertaken by the Griffith University Vice-Chancellor, actually. It's a transdisciplinary research initiative. Briefly, it has 2 elements. The first is the Climate Ready Initiative, which works with governments, industries, peak bodies and sector organisations as a kind of one-stop shop for climate action support and leadership and collaboration. The second element of the Climate Action Beacon is the research and research partnerships. That element has 3 core pillars within it, which are climate motivations, climate transitions and climate justice. And today's webinar is actually a combination, a collaboration between all those different elements, which have involved the input of disciplines throughout the university in acknowledgement that this is, of course, a wicked problem of climate change, and we need all disciplines and hands on deck if we're going to respond effectively and meaningfully. Today's webinar is about the Climate Action Survey. It's in its currently we're collecting data for its 4th iteration. It's a national survey, and I guess I'll pass on to my colleagues Karlien and Samir, who are going to present more substantively on the survey shortly. But I will say that one of the exciting things about this survey, its 4th iteration, you'll be able to find previous summary reports on our website. We'll put those links in the chat for you and send you some links by your email, is that we're interested and we collect data on, whether or not people believe in climate change, but so is everybody, whether or not they're skeptics or deniers, or, the 6 Americas studies and how that's translated across the nation. We do that. But what we were really interested in is what are people doing? What aren't they doing? Why? What are they doing already that we could perhaps leverage off for to foster urgent climate action? What won't they do? What policies would they support? Along with all this demographic data, of course, which gives us like amazing insight into a diverse nation, and the nuance really of the Australian public, because that's really complex science. We know that's really to develop policies and planning when you have such a diverse nation is very difficult science. And this Climate Action Survey is our contribution to finding some rigorous data and information that will support the policy and planning required for the transformations underway and to come as climate changes impact ourselves and our societies. The Climate Action Survey has been led by my wonderful colleagues, Karlien, Paas, Graham Bradley and Samir Deshpande, who have done the most amazing task of surveying international and national surveys alongside reaching out to disciplines across university and saying, what would you put in a national climate action survey, which is quite the feat for anybody who is aware of or works within universities. Asking that many academics what they think should be included in a survey is quite the feat. But the outcome is this extraordinary survey and data resource that we're really keen to share with you today. Strategic input from myself and from the director of the Climate Action Beacon, Professor Brendan Mackey, who's with us today. So hope you enjoy the presentation, and we get some good discussion going, some questions, and yeah, really looking forward to it. So I'll pass over to you, Karlien, to lead us through the survey. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Gary, for this great introduction. So yeah, we've been doing this National Climate Action Survey since 2021, like Gary said, and it's aiming to find out what Australians know, think, feel, and do in response to climate change and the related environmental and climatic events and conditions. The data from our 2021, 2022, and 2023 survey has been published in technical reports that are shown here on the left, and also in summary reports for policy and decision making that are a lot easier to read, possibly, and they're shown on the right as well. And you can find all of them on that link that is published there as well. So all of these reports are found on our website, and we're currently collecting data on the 2024 survey. So, like Gary briefly mentioned, we have been using a conceptual model to actually frame our entire survey because we don't want to just ask a lot of questions. We do, but we also want to link it all together. So what we did is we combined opinions, identity, and worldview. So we want to know what people feel about climate change. What were they exposed to? What have they experienced in extreme weather events? That, for example, they experienced some flooding in 2022. We also want to understand what people understand about climate change. What do they know about it objectively or subjectively as well? And how are they feeling? What are their concerns with climate change? And what are they actually doing? Are they doing any community involvement? Are they doing any recycling, any other pro or anti-environmental behaviors as well? And as in every survey, we want to link that to some demographics. So what we aim to do is to build and test theories with our survey. We want to generate some practical climate action use and inform public debate, discussions, and decision making. So why is our National Climate Action Survey so important? Well, it's a longitudinal survey. We're running it for 5 years consecutively, and we want to use that repeat cross-sectional component. So we want to include some people that we've included in previous year and keep asking them the questions. Are they changing over time, and so on? It's a well-researched survey. We've done research on other surveys, see what they've asked. We've done it multidisciplinary. So we've gone to a lot of different disciplines to not only do a social psychology background like myself, or a marketing background, or a communication background, but we really want to know a variety of backgrounds and link that all into one survey to see how we can get more knowledge on climate change. And our sample is broadly representative of the population in terms of gender, age, and the state where people live. We also have some collaborations outside of academia, which means that we can actually do research on a specific topic or look at a specific demographic, if people are interested in just the Queensland data, or we've done collaborations in a smaller setting with the Tweedshire Council to see what's happening over there. So with the national survey, we sample approximately 4,000 people every year. The first year that was all new respondents, and then from 2022 onwards, we have repeat respondents, so people who've done it before, or people who have not been surveyed before. So the first number in brackets is 1263 in 2022 and 1184 in 2023. Those are the people who've already done the survey before. And those are the people that we can track over time. Yeah, so our survey takes approximately 30 minutes to complete. We obviously get ethical clearance. We use an online survey. We use a panel company called Dynata. All of the questions are answered anonymously, but we have a specific ID number to link all the data, and we've run it every year in the last few months of the year. So like I said before, we've covering a lot of different topics that are in different sections in the survey. Mainly we use 20 or more multi-item scales, a lot of other closed-ended items, and some open-ended questions. And we're asking about lifestyle, about perceptions, about political views, about experiences, and so on. And in 2022, we had some questions about flooding and heat exposure. And in 2023, we asked more questions about the Great Barrier Reef, recycling, and extreme weather warnings. So we partnered up with people from CSIRO to ask the same questions to get a national sample and not just the Great Barrier Reef catchment area, to ask questions about the Great Barrier Reef. So this means that every year we collect 400 pieces of information from each participant, and that's 1.5 million data points per year. So there is a lot of data that we can look at. And what we show you today is only a short snippet of what we could actually look at. So yeah, please do reach out if you're interested and see how we can collaborate. So every survey and every research is not just to be shown independently, but should be shown in the context of when it was done. So one of the things that we have to remember for the 2023 survey, and possibly also for the earlier surveys, is the rising cost of living. We included a question last year, and people indicate that question actually gave us information that 99% of Australians are somewhat impacted by the cost of living. That's only 1% that's not impacted. So that's a lot of people. You also have the domestic economic situation, inflation, extreme weather events and natural disasters that could be in the country, locally, more locally, or even globally, that could impact people. State elections, wars, international conflicts, not necessarily in Australia, but people might still get impacted as well. And obviously UN climate change conferences that get publicity and might make people more aware of climate change. So to quickly show you our sample, and I don't want to go into too much detail, but these are, the next few slides give a brief overview of our sample characteristics for each survey. So in 2021, we had our full sample, and then in 2022, we had repeat respondents, a set of new respondents, and then a combined sample, and the same for 2023. And as you can see, all of these numbers are relatively similar across samples, apart from the age. The repeat respondents are on average older than all of the other samples. The other percentages are quite similar, as you can see. You can also see like the Australian state of residence, and all of these percentages here are relatively similar to the national population as displayed by the ABS. So we're trying to match that up. And then some other statistics, but yes, like I said, I'm not going to go into much detail. It's just to show quick overview of how our sample is looking across all of the different samples. And it's quite similar, which means that comparing it over the years is going to be quite good. So now the real question, do Australians think that climate change is real? 82% of the Australians accept that climate change is happening. But obviously, it's not enough to just know that it's happening or that it's real. What we need to know is whether people think it's important, whether it's an urgent problem. And there seems to be somewhat of disparity between what people are thinking about climate change happening and how much of a problem that is, because only 15% of Australian population think that it's an extremely serious problem now, despite 82% saying that it's actually happening. And then we also asked them, do you think it will be an extremely serious problem by 2050? Only 34% think that it will be an extremely serious problem. These numbers are from the 2023 data set, and actually they've been almost the same percentages for the last 3 years of the survey. So it's not a simple fluke. No, it is something that we find consistently across the years. Now I'll pass over to my colleague Samir.
Thanks very much, Karlien. So we used the question of the belief in climate change scale to segment our audience into 4 segments. These are true believers, unconvinced, skeptics, and deniers. And if you look at the data, Karlien, if you can. Yeah, thank you. You can see that the true believers in Australia are in their mid-70s. The rest of the 25% are then distributed among unconvinced, skeptics, and deniers. This trend has remained more or less constant over our 4-year period that we have collected data. A slight drop in deniers, which is a good thing. How we define it, it's the number of questions that they answer, whether they believe or not believe in climate change. And so the deniers are the ones who would have answered at least 4 to 5 questions not believing in climate change. Can we go to the next slide, Karlien? Just on the previous slide, I want to highlight that the unconvinced is an interesting segment, and perhaps we could have a follow-up discussion later on. We also asked them which of the following discussion best captures their understanding of the meaning of the term climate change, since there is so much confusion and so many diverse opinions in the media. The definition that seems to grab the most attention and support is all changes in the world's climate, regardless of the cause, human or natural phenomena, followed by people believing that this is happening because of human activity, which you see is in the high 20s. So the good thing is people are more or less steady, although you do see a variation over the years, but more or less that one reason of regardless of the cause remains constant as the most accepted definition. Thanks, Karlien. When you profile the segment as to who cares about climate change and so who tend to be belonging to the true believers segment, you constantly see over our 4-year period that they tend to be women, younger people, students, and those who reside in inner urban resident areas. Those who go to those who have university degree and those who tend to vote for the progressive political party, mainly Labour and Greens. Um, Individuals who deny, disregard, or don't get into action tend to be men who are older, who tend to be religious in nature, who are less highly educated, and tend to vote more politically conservative samples. And again, this trend has remained almost identical over our 4-year period of data collection. Thanks, Karlien. I believe it's back to you.
It is. So one of the things we looked at is whether or not people actually experience climate change conditions or extreme weather events, and whether or not that impacted their beliefs. So what we found is that 60% of Australians have experienced at least one extreme weather or natural disaster event in their lifetime. And 68% reported that they or their family had been harmed to some extent because of such an event. That's quite a high number. It's over half of Australians. What we then found is that people who have actually experienced these changes, events, or circumstances scored significantly higher on nearly all of the climate change variables than those who did not experience such an event. So what I mean with climate change variables is whether they're more concerned about it, all of those kind of things. So experiencing something that you attribute to climate change means that you're also more aware of it. So we also asked what people would think about certain climate policies. So we listed 20 possible policies, and we categorized them into 3 types of policies. So we asked about climate positive mitigation strategies. So whether people would support setting a target of national net zero carbon emissions by 2050, or putting a tax on carbon emissions, with the money raised being invested in clean and renewable energy. Or we asked about climate negative mitigation strategies, which could be whether or not they would support taxpayer-funded financial grants or subsidies going to the fossil fuel industry, or building new coal-fired power stations as old ones are retired. Or the more climate positive adaptation ones, which would be provide government financial grants or subsidies for citizens to cyclone or bushfire proof their homes, or invest taxpayer money in technology solutions to keep corals, such as those in the Great Barrier Reef, cool in a warming ocean. What we found that support for pro-environmental policies was stronger among the progressive rather than the conservative Australians. And here are some example policies. So the target of net zero carbon emission by 2050, if we look at all of the Australians, we found a support for by 76%. If we then break it down to LNP and Labour, we could see that there is a difference there in the level of support. The same for minimizing the commitments to international climate agreements to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Overall, we had 41% of support, 42 people were opposed to that idea. But if we break it down to LNP and Labour voters, you would see a slightly different percentages. If we look at whether people would support climate positive adaptation with constructing concrete walls to prevent coastal erosion, we could see that they are actually quite similar for all Australians and LNP and Labour voters. So there is there's definitely some interesting results if we break down into political party. Like I said, we've only broken it down to LNP and Labour, but we could potentially look at different parties as well. We also did in the 2023 survey some some questions about the Great Barrier Reef. And we asked if people knew what the Great Barrier Reef was. 96% said yes. We also asked whether or not they had visited in the past. And among those who visited, 15% did within the last year, and the remainder did 28% in 1 to 5 years ago, and more than a third visited more than a decade ago. Of those Australians, half of them strongly agreed that the Great Barrier Reef is part of their Australian identity. And we also found that only 30% of Australians were optimistic about the future of the Great Barrier Reef. What we could do with this data as well is break it down into those that are in the Great Barrier Reef catchment area versus anywhere else in Queensland or outside of Queensland. And that's the numbers you see here. So you can see we only have 216 people in the Great Barrier Reef catchment area out of over 4,058 participants. And but their mean ages and percentages of female are relatively similar to the other breakdowns. So we asked a question about how people feel that climate change and the Great Barrier Reef, if climate change is a threat to it or not. And there's differences between the Great Barrier Reef catchment area, how those people reply to that question versus the other groups. As you can see, 58% said yes, climate change is a threat requiring immediate action of those people in the Great Barrier Reef catchment area. But if you look at all of Australia, that's almost 10% higher. There's also a small group of people who do not believe in climate change or that don't have a view on climate change relating to the Great Barrier Reef. And those are relatively similar-ish across the four groups. Samir, back to you to talk about some pro-environmental behaviors.
Thanks, Karlien. While we tried to understand what respondents think, feel about climate change, what really matters at the end of the day is what they do with all this information. Does it influence their actions? And so we were really interested in understanding, and we have a variety of questions that we asked in our 2023 survey about what kind of actions have they taken in the past or are they taking in the present, and what they intend to do in the near future. So and this particular question that we have been asking, that you see on the slide, we have asked over the last 3 years on the various actions that they take. In general, Australians engage in between 5 to 6 of the 16 pro-environmental behaviors that we ask them. They tend to be high on using reusable containers, doing recycling, or refusing to use plastic products, voting for candidates who support or promise to deliver on climate change policies. Those kind of actions tend to be popular. Some of the other ones, where it comes to spending more money, paying more for the products, and you start seeing a decline in that support. So even though, and that's, I guess, the main point I want to make through my discussion, is that even though the concern, the anxiety, and the belief for climate change is high, there is a gap between their concerns, their action, and their actions. What we call in marketing call values action gap is clearly seen in when it comes to climate action area. So can we go to the next slide, Karlien? So why do we see this gap, and why do Australians not indulge in climate actions? If you look at the top 4 reasons, you see that it is what I would say are very typical reasons that you see in marketing and consumer behavior, which is people don't have enough time, or they find the product or the service too expensive, or it is too inconvenience to adopt. But something that stands out within the environmental action area is that 24%, the third category, where consumers say that they don't believe that their actions are going to solve the environmental problems on two fronts. One is there's just skepticism of the efficacy of the behavior on climate change. But more importantly, they believe that I'm just an individual. As an individual, how much difference do I make in relation to especially the big polluters, the big companies, governments, and increasingly, I'm seeing a lot of discussion about how rich people are per capita are such high polluters that I, as a middle class or lower middle class person, why should I take the burden of reducing the climate change when the rich people are having all the fun? So there is a clear gap in what they believe and what they do. And these are the four primary reasons why there is lackluster action in Australia. Thanks, Karlien. Are there behaviors that Australians support they would take in the future? The two that stand out, and again, consistently over our period of conducting this survey study, is one is their interest, 75% of them wanting to install a home solar battery system. And the second one is interest in buying an electric or hybrid car. The solar battery system is particularly interesting because, for example, a person like me who lives in a unit, my body corporate is not supportive of me installing a solar battery system. And so those are some of the factors. It's not just cost, not just convenience or lack of convenience. It's also about the support you get or do not get from the interested parties who have the power to decide for you. And of course, electric car or hybrid cars are becoming popular now and you can see more and more Teslas and BYDs on the road these days. And as more mainstream companies start offering their products at a cost that is relatively reasonable to the usual gas guzzling vehicles, we'll definitely see an uptake in those two fronts. And again, those who are progressives, the women, younger, university educated, living in inner urban areas tend to be more supportive of interest in undertaking these actions. Thanks, Karlien. Next one. What is the behavioral willingness in terms of changing their behaviors to support climate action? If you look at the top three indicators, it is again about having renewable energy infrastructure such as solar farms, greatly reducing energy use, and having a renewable energy infrastructure such as wind turbines in their local area. So they are willing to put up with some of the inconveniences here, as you can see. The ones that they are not willing to indulge in is the bottom part of this slide, which is paying more for the products. And so that's a challenge for both the governments and companies, how to offer products and services which are at a price point that consumers are used to paying for the current set of products and services. This will require support from both policymakers and at the end of the day, some visionary corporations who are willing to put in some sacrifice to their bottom line so that eventually in the future, they are able to achieve a scale, a volume that then enables them to achieve the profit that they're used to right now. Thanks, Karlien. What among the new respondents, what are the behavior change or what are the areas that they are willing to undertake in the near future? Some of the areas are the usual ones, which is to recycle more, to reduce less of plastic, to reduce use of plastic items. Food waste is also becoming more popular over the years as we get more and more information about it in the media, how food waste is clearly linked with climate crisis. So those are the top three areas in which consumers are willing to support. Over 16% of new respondents indicated that they had changed no aspects of their lifestyle over the past year due to concerns of climate change. And these 16% again could be among those who are skeptics and unconvinced. Thanks, Karlien. What Karlien highlighted before remains the most important point of the 2023 survey, which was not the case in the previous 2 years, is that cost of living is the main issue concerning Australians. Um, on the other hand, if you see climate change shows up around 61% generally, and the other areas that are related are also in their 60s. So if we want to address climate change crisis, uh, and then you look back at the price points, people are not willing to pay more for the products and services. All this adds up to tell us that yes, cost of living crisis is having an impact on climate change actions as well. Thank Karlien. A couple of slides on distress and concerns. We see that over the years, we see an increase in how consumers are worried, feeling guilty, distressed, anxious, overwhelmed, and upset. So as more and more news comes in of facing firsthand the climate crisis or witnessing what's going on around in Australia and around the world, definite increase is witnessed by Australians, and they're feeling the emotions. Next slide, Karlien. I think I made this point earlier, and maybe I'll jump through it, that yes, Australians are recycling often, and this has been a movement over last couple of decades. And we are seeing that Australians have now gotten into a habit of recycling. And I think recycling behavior is a good cue on how we should convince Australians to undertake other kinds of behaviors, is that we need to create an infrastructure. We need to create the support structure, the system in place, and we need a sufficient number of Australians to undertake these behaviors to mainstream the climate actions. So I think we should learn from the lessons that we have learned from how we have now convinced a good number of Australians to undertake recycling behaviors. Thanks. What do Australians think about the different energy sources? While there is a support for clean energy, there's a clear divide by political party preference. So those who are progressives tend to are more favorable towards the clean energy initiatives, while those who are conservative, they tend to rely on the existing systems of energy source. And so when it comes to energy source, there's a clear divide by political preference. Thanks, Karlien. By now, you must have figured out who supports climate action. And we feel that those who are already undertaking some actions, especially as we discussed before, 5 to 6 out of the 16 listed behaviors, those who are community involved. And here there's a slight difference between the progressive profile and the people who are involved in community activities. And this could be activities such as volunteering for non-profit organizations, working for food banks, so on and so forth. You see that men 18 to 54 are showing up here who are religious. And that group actually was under the skeptics and unconvinced. But in that subset, if they are community active, then they do tend to also support climate action. So that's a slight complexity in our data. But of course, we know that world is, of course, complex to understand. And of course, those who are willing to adopt friendly actions are also the ones who are supportive of it. Karlien? So what do we do about all this? And so these are our humble recommendations on future actions for people who are involved in the environmental sector, for people like me who are into behavior change marketing, and of course, policymakers, think tanks, and individuals and organizations who offer products and services is we need to, first of all, have a swell up, we need to continue to have an awareness campaign. But I would like to make a point here, which is, I think we have done enough of scaremongering among people. Let's stop telling people the catastrophic problems that are happening in Australia and around the world. The time is shifted to speaking about solutions. What can we do? What can we offer? And what can others do so that we can do this as a collective action where we address the barriers of ensuring that the products are reasonably priced, they're conveniently available, that the quality is the same as they're used to today. And of course, bring up some trust that these products and their behaviors will have a good impact on climate change. Um, and of course, we need to bring social influence to bear, because if there are three things that influence behaviors, as I talk about, is fun. If a product and a behavior is perceived as fun, easy, and popular, people will undertake that action. And we need to bring that knowledge to climate action change. Thanks, Karlien. And I think our last slide is, so what do we do with this data? As we have done with the last 2 years of our data, we will, we are in the process of collecting our 4th year data. We have already finished our repeat sample information. We are now in the process of collecting data from new respondents. We hope to achieve the same goal of collecting data from 4,000 respondents. We will then write up these results. Our reports will be available early next year, both technical report and policy report. We, of course, also then publish this information in terms of academic journals. We also invite community partners, some of you listening to us today, to join us. We are, of course, and if you want to ask a few questions at the national level, we are willing to partner with you for the 2025 round of data collection. While our initial dedication was to collect data for 5 years, the overwhelming response that we have received from the community, we are actually now motivated to collect this data in the continuing beyond the 5 years. And so, of course, funding is a problem. So we are more than happy to work with community partners and see how we can still manage the financial situation of conducting the study, which tends to be expensive. And we really thank Griffith University for supporting us so far. But going forward, we might need a bit more help to continue this project, which is an important project to inform policy, to inform practice. That's all from us, me and Karlien. We are now, and thank you for listening to us. We are now happy to answer any questions, or if you have any comments to make, please feel free to do so.
Thanks very much, Karlien and Samir. I'll give people just a moment. This is fantastic. There's such a there's so many different ways in which we can slice and dice the data that we've collected. Speaking about the way in which businesses and individuals can be impacted through social marketing is certainly one of those ways. But I guess depending on that will translate differently, to your own sector and to your own work. So just encouraging people to have a closer look at the summary report for policy and decision making, and see if we can be of any assistance. We're a public university, so we're about supporting the public. So keen to collaborate where we can. Brenda, did you have any comments that you'd like to make whilst you're in the audience, while people get a question or a discussion point together?
Yeah, thanks, Kerry, and thanks everyone attending today, and for Karlien and Smith for such a great presentation and giving us these insights from this very deep and substantive survey. One of the statistics that was shown at the beginning that I find very interesting is that whilst 80-odd% of Australians accept climate change is happening, only 15% say it's, if you like, urgent, and that suggests to me that they want their. If we think about the policy implications of that, one way of interpreting that is that they're telling the governments they want them to have climate action and climate policy shut, if you like, because if more than 50, if the 82% who accept climate change is happening thought it was a crisis now,
yeah,
you'd think there'd be more pressure on governments for more, to elevate climate policy above other issues. So to me, that finding is very interesting and explains a lot of behaviour and perhaps also some government policy responses.
There's definitely a cognitive dissonance, isn't there, between the science and how the Australian public is responding. And in some ways, and we've spoken about this as a team, Australians are getting exactly the climate change policies that they want, because the politics is actually following public opinion, and there's this an unhealthy relationship between, as there often is, between the Australian public and Australian governments, and also, I guess, our experts. So it's a really important point, I think, that yeah. And then looking, I guess, too, while people are getting their questions together, and please put them in the chat if you'd like. And then, just the ways in which that those sorts of things translate into the everyday of policy, and how we might. I mean, it's one thing to make the observation, but the survey gives you sufficient evidence to know how to tackle those issues. So
yeah, I think also the other finding I found interesting was about the positive climate actions that people support, such as putting having home solar systems and battery systems. That's actually really important, because one of the big opportunities is to electrify everything and have it powered by clean energy, right? So to get people off petrol cars onto electric cars, help get people off gas stoves onto electric stoves, change their heating and cooling systems, etc. So there's huge opportunity at the domestic level to dramatically reduce greenhouse gas emissions if we can have an affordable electrification of homes, including rental properties, and to have that powered by clean energy. So the fact that people are very open to this, and such a large number of people are supportive of those domestic solar systems, I think is very encouraging.
it's good counsel. Can I invite anyone from our audience to raise their hand and ask a question? Oh, Alex has. Alex asks, just out of curiosity, I think I saw one of your early slides that your sample was 45% university educated. Is that correct? Does anyone know what percentage of the Australian adult population has a university degree?
I don't know what the percentage of the Australian adult population is that has a university degree, but it's anything that's an undergraduate or more is classified as a university degree, and it's around 40 to 45 was the outlier, but around 40 to 43%. In some samples, it was 38 even. So it is around the 40%. But like I said, I don't know what the population is actually.
Right, that's something for us to follow up on. Sue Hook asks, Samir, could you expand on the unconvinced segment, please?
So the way we have defined it is the number of questions that they answered, whether they believe or not believe in climate change. And so we use the spectrum of number of questions that they answered. And so unconvinced, I believe Karlien was 1 or 2 questions that they said that they don't believe in climate change. So it's our label as to along the spectrum, they are less convinced compared to the true believers. And we're calling that unconvinced because it gives us an opportunity that if you give them enough support structure, they will then switch their opinion towards more favorability.
They're the sort of portion of the population, Samir, that are more likely to change their opinions, are ready to change their opinions, rather than the skeptics and the deniers who have already made up their minds. And 20% of the population is a significant portion. So, yeah.
And to the previous question, I just did a quick search. It's Australians are around 30% with bachelor's degree.
Right.
So there is a gap between our survey sample. It's slightly higher educated. Yes, that's a limitation of our study.
I also did a quick search, and apparently it was around 50% in 2022. So it's going down in the last few years.
You mean our
So,
survey study?
yeah.
Yeah.
Matt, Matt Konock, I can see you. Did you have a question?
I did, and it's building on the last response from Samir and an earlier point. Thanks, first of all, for a great presentation. It's really fascinating stuff, and it's great to see this work being done. I'm interested in the questions you've used. Samir, you noted there are sort of multiple questions that you've used to distinguish and categorise your sort of climate change believers and skeptics into different into a typology, and I wonder how much. From those questions, how much additional nuance might there be in that spectrum that could be explored, and what could we learn from that? And you might not have an answer to this yet, but how might those nuanced kind of beliefs and attitudes be changing over time?
So the nuanced are definitely, you use the right word, it is nuanced. So there are slight differences between their beliefs. And it is our judgment that we used to categorize them on the basis of 1 to 2, 3 to 4, or 4 to 5 questions that they used, whether they not believe or believe, to put them into those categories. So as a researcher, I will be honest with you that is open for discussion. And you might have your own understanding of how you want to categorize the same data. But I think, as Kerry rightly said, it's more about the possibility of how open they are to change their opinions and how open they are to accept some of the strategies that we offer to them in terms of solutions. And one could confidently say that the deniers are less open, they're less likely to respond to your strategies than a true believer would be. Because one of the sufficient condition for change would be, is my attitude open to change? So in that regard, I think our categories do make sense in terms of categorization. Do they change? Our data shows over 3 years that they have remained quite similar, quite within the range of a change of 1 to 2%. We saw a slight drop in the true believers in 2022, because 21 was the COP conference, got a lot of publicity. It was also the election year coming up. 22 was the election year, and 21 there was a lot of discussion around climate change, and Thiel candidates were seeing a benefit of that whole momentum in media otherwise. But then we saw a drop later on, and it starting to pick up again. So, but again, these changes are so small that I'm more comfortable saying that the trend have remained identical or within the small range over the years.
And I guess just if we could just add on to that, Samir, understanding the surveying context, knowing Australia's significant multicultural population, there are also some interesting results for ethnic communities within Australia. And then once we start to understand that population and how news from home or refugees who have had to move because of drought or severe or extreme weather events, that also gives us information for such a diverse continent and public about how we might be able to address that community in ways that are meaningful and relevant to their own experience. So I think these broad observations about skeptics, deniers, believers, unconvinced are important. But I think the really interesting stuff, the magic happens when we start to dig down, as the survey does. One of the things that I found really interesting, other than the ethnic communities, is, and I say this, I often bring this up, is that men rated their knowledge of climate change greater than women did, but women actually scored higher on an objectively measured scale. So climate change and climate action at this particular point in Australia and international politics, where gender politics is so much at the fore, that's absolute fodder for where and how we should direct our messaging. Just one example of the way in which it's nuanced. I'll go to is that all right with you, Matt? that helped?
Yes, thank you.
Louisa Nash has asked the question about the data shows the appetite for solar and hybrid EVs in the future is high, but propensity to spend more on climate positive products now is low. Why? Do we infer that it is because they expect the cost of these to come down? This will only happen as demand rises, so it's a catch-22. Has anyone got any comments on that? Karlien, Samir, or even Brendan?
I mean, since I discussed that slide, I might just pitch in here saying that, yes, Louisa, you're correct. There is a desire to, or an aspiration to use some of these products, but at this moment, you're correct. The prices are just too high, again, compared to the kind of cars and the price points we have in the market. And so the expectation is to the prices to come down. In fact, if you see the Tesla pricing, it has gone down over the last 12 months. And as the market demand increases and you see the volume going up, I do envision prices will come down and demand will go up.
And I guess there's also in our, does Karlien, I'll just butt in, there's the cultural context for motor vehicles. I mean, electric vehicles have been on the nose in Australia in the last 12 months, about whether there's going to be enough charging stations and, the way in which, the motor vehicle industry and, I don't know, motor vehicle culture in Australia is such a dense thing is also something to consider. Over to you, Karlien.
Yeah, I think the other thing is, for example, I would love to have an electric vehicle if I would have the opportunity, but given my rental situation, I might not be able to charge it very well. So if you're in a unit, it's harder to actually charge your vehicle. So it's not just wanting it, but it's also the opportunity, like Gary said, like it is a bit tricky sometimes.
Yeah. Louisa asks, if the survey is already underway for the 4th iteration, are special topics already set? They are indeed. I know the answer to that one, but we're happy to talk about the 5th year also.
Yes.
And Isabel, yes, we will be putting a recording of this presentation available. Tash has already answered that. Yeah, coral bleaching is in there. So Matt and the people from Grabumpa who are present will be interested in those as well. Has anybody else got any further questions or comments?
If I may just ask a question to the people attending, are there any topics of interest that we have missed that you believe that we should be exploring in the future?
Just quick question about that. Are you tracking sort of sources of information relevant to climate kind of impacts and policy that people are following, and what sources and the sources that they place their trust in? I presume that's already there, right?
Gary, it's your territory.
Yes, we have, and we did it for the first 2 years. We didn't do it last year because there was no point asking the same question. That wasn't going to show much shift. So it's interesting to look at the places where people get their information from, who they trust, and then knowing, for example, most Australians, the principal way they're getting information about climate change is through their own personal observations. On one hand, that's concerning, and we hear this this is. I mean, it's evidenced in the survey, but we know that people say, no, the weather's always been like this. This is always the same. My dad, my grandfather said whatever. But knowing that information can help us, design policies, interventions and programs that take account of that fact. We also know that when it was closely followed, those personal information about personal observations about climate change was closely followed by commercial media. But the places that people trusted were things like, the Bureau of Meteorology, scientists and scientific organisations, the top places people trusted. and we put those things together, we have to find a way of, collaborating with communication professionals who are able to translate, scientific expertise so it aligns with people's personal experiences. And just and think about ways in which we can design our communication strategies so that we account for that. We also know that commercial media, the people who struggle, and you'd know this, Matt, to be included as sources and to be included as experts and authority in commercial news media and news media more generally, are often not scientists and scientific experts. So there's some work then to be done between journalists and news media organisations and scientists and scientific organisations. Some of that's already underway, but that's clearly a place where we could direct some energy with some results for motivating the entire Australian public towards more urgent climate action. So yes, the data's there. Long answers. So you can tell I've been on leave, can't you? I'm all excited and I've got lots of words. Everybody else is in November. I'm going to just limp to the finish line.
Welcome back.
Gary, I think there are some questions.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah.
Alexandra.
Alexandra? Oh.
Yeah, we have some questions.
Yeah. What were the anti-environmental behaviours that you mentioned in one of the slides? Samir?
I don't think we mentioned anti-environmental behaviors so much as preference for pro-environmental behaviors. So if you can clarify that question, Alexandra.
I think the title said anti-environmental if they didn't do the pro-environmental behaviors. So it was just why they weren't doing them. So because they didn't feel like it was needed for the environment, things like that. So they just stated that they didn't have any concerns, so they didn't need to do it.
Sorry, that's a title slide issue.
Right, okay. Sue asks she'd like to know more about awareness of climate health impacts. Example, is there an increase in people's awareness of climate health impacts? I think might cover it, so. Climate health, Samir, Karlien?
I'm just thinking, I think our awareness levels have remained high over the years, and I think they've remained strong. Karlien, do you want to highlight?
I don't think they were increasing. I think they were relatively stable.
Correct.
From the top of my head, yeah.
And some of the
strong.
Yeah. And some of the data, Sue, from and you'll find this in the summary report around heat and health, might give some indication too of where those attitudes and awareness are heading.
Louisa has a question on
Yeah.
GBR.
We don't have any insights apart from that. It is indeed a bit counterintuitive to think that they are less concerned about the impact of climate change on the Great Barrier Reef the closer they are.
I think that this is interesting, Karlien, and I've just been reading a paper that Matt Kernock, I'm sorry, Matt, if I'm throwing you under a bus here, but my turn. But some of the data that you've received around trust in scientific expertise. So if around the Great Barrier Reef catchment residents, there may well be part explanation in that.
What was the question?
Well, the question is around, it's interesting that the data shows respondents based on the Great Barrier Reef catchment are slightly less concerned about the impact of climate change on the reef compared to those living in the rest of the country. And do we have any insight on that? And I'm talking about the collaboration with CSIRO and your recently published paper, which showed which was about scientific. If you don't trust the scientific expertise, and you think things are okay, then and you're living in that reef space, and you've got that, I guess, that experience of watching the reef, and you're relying on your personal observations. Those things can undermine the sense of urgency to a greater degree, pardon the pun, than those people who aren't actually living in the reef catchment area. Matt?
Yeah, I think your climate action survey's got some important kind of comparative data there, albeit there's a smaller sample size in the GBR catchment, but there are other data sources like cell temp surveys that you can compare with that shows there's some differences in the regional catchments of the Great Barrier Reef region compared to the sort of rest of Australia, and it's I don't know, there are probably lots of reasons that might explain that, and I think that's ongoing work in progress between our teams to unpack that and try and understand it and interpret it in an appropriate way. So yeah, you've been on leave, Kerry, but there's work afoot.
Sounds like a job for 2025. Yes, I have been on leave.
Yeah.
So we do have some insight, and we'll certainly do. Karlien, did you have anything else to offer on that question?
No, just like it is fascinating, and we need to see if we can find out if that holds if we look at the cell temp data, because they have a larger sample, because we only have 216 people from the catchment area, which is quite a low sample. So if we can compare the cell temp data with our Great Barrier Reef catchment area and then the rest of Australia and see if that comparison still holds would be really, really interesting.
Yeah, which is the point of the collaboration, of course. So that's
exactly
good to see that happening.
And Michelle is facilitating that, and there she is. Hi, Michelle.
There she is. Michelle Dye, did you have a question?
Welcome back, Associate Professor Kerry Foxwell-Norton. Thanks for the presentation, Karlien and Samir. It's just so interesting. I feel like there is just so much to mine from this data. One thing I thought was interesting is you're finding that Australians who had experienced a natural disaster had a much higher. So that's kind of seems to be a little bit in contradiction to the idea that catchment residents, Great Barrier Reef catchment residents, wouldn't have a higher appreciation of climate change. But there must be something in there about how we experience it's about experience, isn't it? That's what that's actually about. So I wonder if it's about how we experience the reef, and because the reef is big, it's not just one little thing. So
no, exactly. And living in the Great Barrier Reef catchment area means you are close to the reef, but it doesn't mean that compared to one of the other events, if you were in Lismore during the floods, you obviously have a bigger experience of how climate change can impact your life than just living in the Great Barrier Reef catchment area. You might not experience the bleaching or any other devastation to the reef in the same level or intensity as people experiencing flooding, bushfires, whatever. So that might be one of the things that could possibly explain it, but who knows?
There are some contradictions about proximity, about spatial and temporal elements of people's responses to climate change, which as you say, Mish, worthwhile having a deep dig. I'll move on to Patricia Lee. She says, thank you for a fascinating webinar. No worries, Patricia. Do you find that focusing on specific observable local effects of climate change, such as heat waves or flooding, and discussing community adaptation strategies is an effective way to engage climate change skeptics? I remember a report by the World Economic Forum suggesting this method could reduce perceptions of political and ideological bias. I have some thoughts. Karlien and Samir, over to you first.
So one of the that's a good, hypothesis to check. Our limitation of the survey is we tend to focus more on the national issues. We are unable to go local or specific to the neighborhood problems. But I think we could definitely, this could be done as a supplementary study and go deeper into how individual local conditions can also affect people's perceptions and maybe influence their opinion on climate change.
Karlien, did you have anything to offer before I jump in?
No, jump in.
Thanks. Patricia, one of the things that happened in the first round of the survey, the first iteration, which coincided with the federal government election in that year of 2020,
One.
Was it? Was we looked pretty closely at the way in which political preferences impacted responses to climate change and how people were going to vote and where they were going to position climate change as a priority when they at the ballot box. And one of the interesting things, and we did some press releases around this at the time, one of the interesting things that came forward was, we tend to, and we have done it also, we tend to group the Liberal and the National Party into a single sort of conglomerate. But what we found was there was a greater awareness of climate change and a greater priority of climate change is around National Party voters. So that signals a couple of things. I mean, it does signal that people who are, National Party voters are, in regional areas. You've got your Liberal Party, black turtleneck wearing, latte sipping Liberals in urban areas. And then, people who are living on the land and National Party voters, are that farming agricultural community. The way in which that nuance that we're trying to, unpack here might impact upon voting and political preferences. And then it gives us insight into also those regional areas of Australia. And so we don't make the assumption as a prominent environmental organisation had done prior in that federal election, that we're only dealing with people in these regional areas who are ignorant, who are climate laggards. We are dealing with we can distinguish a population in these regional areas who are National Party voters predominantly, who are aware of changes in the landscape, who are concerned about climate change. And so I guess that helps us gear local adaptation strategies, which, as you point out, and so have many, many others, including myself, developing climate change strategies that are meaningful locally and resonate with people's experience and the way they live their lives is the most powerful way to engage them, not only in awareness, but in responses so that it makes sense in terms of their everyday lives. So, yeah. And that moves the question from political and ideological bias to a question of a way of life, a culture, an industry, and a community, which may well allow us to bypass some of the more heated discussions around conservative versus progressive politics. Maybe also about their jobs, I'm not sure. Thanks, Patricia, no worries. Okay. It's a lot of conversation. It's very interesting. It's great to, and I think, Samir, your question about, what other information would you like to know? If you have any ideas about from the current survey or questions that you think aren't being asked on a national platform that you'd like to see answered, something that is perhaps perplexes you and you speak about at dinner parties and barbecues that you're invited to. So yeah, those sorts of questions.
Hi, Kerry. I have another one for you. Sorry,
Right.
I couldn't help myself. Thank you, Samir and Karlien, for it's been fascinating. I was just thinking, working in Griffith sustainability, we're looking at engagement and communications and the best way that we can embed, obviously, sustainability in the university. And I was wondering, how do we make happen? It's a big question, but like, how is it the easiest way to embed a culture of sustainability, for example, in a country like Australia, to have more, to give more importance and more of a focus of climate change?
Is that a question for me, Patricia, or all of us?
Yeah, but like just opening it to everyone and just looking at the strategies. What would be better for us to? What can we focus? What can we do first to start embedding sustainability?
Sabir and Karlien, there's some data in the survey, and I'll throw to you to explain it, that shows what motivates people, whether it's their perceptual. Remember the question I'm talking about. It's whether people are motivated by what they think their friends would like them to do, or significant, that question. Would you like to just tell Patricia about that question and what we found there? I'm putting them on the spot. Whether or not
Thank
people
you.
are motivated by motivated by what they think others would like them to do, or what they are actually doing. I can't remember the question exactly. Karlien?
I'm just going to look at my cheat sheet document before answering that. So if Samir wants to jump in while I search, then that would be great.
I can, Samir, have you got something?
No, I will let Karlien answer this.
While Karlien's doing that, I will say this, Patricia, that we tend to jump to the facts that communicate the urgency, and often they're based in, in really valuable science and really rigorous science, and we're very quick thinking that will move populations, or whether they be university populations or communities, that if we just present them with the facts and we do it loudly in colour and with bright lights, that will be enough to move the population. I think we're pretty certain by now that approach has been ineffective. So I guess my starting point is already to always, in a communication 101, is to know your audience and to know your context. So if I'm going to regional Queensland, to an outback mining town, I need to be mindful of and respectful of those people and the way that they live their lives, and try to appeal to things that already matter to them. And I think that is always underpinned by the science. It's always underpinned by statistics, but it's a more clever and considered, strategic and persuasive form of communication that is more likely to impact, not guaranteed, but more likely to resonate with people.
That's right, and that's where we're seeing as well, like the importance of our message and how we communicate science. So yeah, that's where we're looking at in Griffith, actually, for us as well. Thank you, Kerry.
Karlien, you've got that. No worries, Patricia.
Yeah, so the one of the questions we asked was, how likely are you to do each of the following things if a person that you like and respect asks you to do this? And people would not necessarily join a campaign to convince elected officials to take action to reduce climate change. However, the points where they are more likely to do something, although it is almost like between a 60-40, 50-50 split, whether they would not or would do it. So you won't convince everyone by doing that. They're more willing to donate money to an organization working on climate change, or support an organization that makes climate change possible. So there is a few things that people would do if someone asked them to do them, but unfortunately, it is still very minimal.
Perhaps we can get back to Patricia with that one. That's not quite the question I was thinking about, but I know there's so much data there that we can perhaps get back to you on that one, Patricia, in the future. Any further questions or comments?
I think Sue Cook had a question. Wonder if action could be stimulated by showing which faculty doing best on sustainability metrics than others. Like hotels reusing towels.
That might be in response to Patricia's comment as well.
Okay.
I think reading that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I think that well, we've been here for nearly an hour and a half. So Sue, happy to, I think perhaps Sue, yourself and Patricia Lee and the survey team could have a conversation. This data is available for Griffith University staff and students, and for externals and collaborators. Pardon me. So please do reach out. Can you please join me in thanking our presenters for their wonderful work and their wonderful work on the survey more broadly. And
thank you.
Thanks so much for your attendance, and please do reach out